Well, it's good to be here with you today and with the chair of Boston Pizza International. Jim Treliving is an astute investor, a philanthropist, CBC dragon, and fearless decision maker. When he makes a decision, big or small, if it's about work, it's with his heart. If it's about money, it's with his head. And if it's about people or pizza, it's with his gut. Jim and his accountant and partners have taken Boston Pizza a long way from Greek statues and a handful of scribbled recipes. He shares the bumps and lumps of life and business in his new book called Decisions. Good title.
Great title, Fanny. Great title.
So when did you decide you had to write about decisions?
I was actually coerced into it by one of the producers on CBC at the Big Decision, and we were doing that, and she said, you really should write a book. So I said, I don't know anything about writing books, I don't know anything about that, and she said, well, I can help you. So that's how we put it together.
I see. Well, you've been there before. You didn't know anything about making pizza pie either.
No.
And you jumped into doing that. Let's go back to your beginnings.
Yes.
Prairie boy, saw the world through a prairie lens. Apparently the Trelivings, according to this book, were like the Cleavers.
They were. Very
Pretty
much
normal
like the
fam.
Very, very normal. Unlocked doors, keys in the car, you know, just a nice little town, 2,500 people of Virgin, Manitoba. And life was just easy, you know. My dad was a local barber. He had a business there. He had a fellow working with him, and we owned the building we're in. And, you know, everything was, I thought everybody lived like we did. I thought the whole world was just like us.
Sure.
Until you woke up when I was 19 and ended up in the Mountain Police. And that's when the world changed.
But I bet as a little kid,
Yes.
in a little town, you'd listen to the train go through and think, maybe one day I'll be on it. I'll be out of Dodge.
Exactly. You know, I remember those clear, crystal clear nights of laying in bed by myself, and all of a sudden you'd hear this whistle, and it would go from one end of the town to the other, and it was, you could tell whether it's going east or west, because that's the only way it went. And I can remember sitting there, I wonder where those people are going, because I used to see the trains going through, hung around the train station. And you'd see people in the dining cars in those days, and you know, the conductors all had the silver hats and the gold braid on them, and engineers were all done up, and so on and so forth. And I kept thinking, I wonder where these people are all going, how they live. Always with my father saying to me, there's nothing in these small towns for you, get out of here, you know, go west, young man, was the big period.
And your mother said?
She was really the heart between us and the family. My mother was 17 years younger than my father. So she was the princess, as we used to say in that family. You never, ever, ever even question her. You could look outside and say it's snowing, and she could do that, and you'd say, no, it isn't. She'd say, Dad would look at you and say, what are you talking about? You just listen to your mother. So that was the way our family was. And you know, we had our family dinners at 5 o'clock, 6 o'clock at night, 7 o'clock on most nights through the week, and then when you went to school. On the weekends, you had to be home for Sunday dinner. That was it. There was no excuses. And there was my sister and myself at that time, and then later on, they had another young lady come along, and she was my younger sister. And so we had just an ordinary family that was, like you say, the Cleavers. It was a Cleaver family all the way.
And you had a dad, because it was the time, who said, no wife of mine will work.
Oh, exactly. I mean, when we both went to school, my sister and I, Mom was, you got to remember, my grandfather at that time ran the Ogilvy's, the elevator in town. And he was the layman preacher on Sundays at the Pentecostal church. He was the mayor of my hometown for 29 years, so you couldn't really do a whole lot of bad things about him knowing about it. So I got home pretty quick. And then Mom was sort of the thing that was the homemaker, and all of a sudden there was nothing really for her to do. And she thought, she was a very bright woman, and very aggressive type of thing, and all of a sudden she ends up going down to the Scales and Rothney store and getting a job. Comes home and she's proud as heck, and Dad said, looked at her and he said, am I not providing enough here? I mean, the hurt in his eyes, that ended, her job lasted, I think, about 45 minutes. And that was the end of it.
And any mother will tell you they do work.
Oh yeah.
Hello. And you know that.
Oh, absolutely.
You're evolved.
Yeah, exactly.
We can probably even call you a feminist today.
Well, I would be on that side, yeah.
Although
I won't tell Arlene that, because if she does, she goes bananas. That's how I get her going.
Arlene on the Dragon's Den. So some entrepreneurs in your family, obviously, Grandpa who was a mayor, that ran deep. The military connection, is that
my side of the family, my dad's side of the family, Treliving, goes back to the 1500s. I actually got a lady that was in England. I found out where our name is a Cornish name. So when I went back to England a couple of times and looked at where our family name came from, there was volumes of it back there. I actually found a picture that was in a wrapping box where we were moving my mother out, and we thought it was from the back of a Navy cut cigarette thing. And it was actually my great-great-grandfather who was in the British Navy with Nelson and who sailed off to India because if Nelson got defeated, they would bring the fleet back, and he was an admiral in the British Navy. So we go way back.
Okay, so when the Red Surge called, obviously there was a little bit of that in your family DNA. Yeah. You became a Mountie. Everybody proud as punch about you.
That was right. It was a great time. The Mount Police at that time was tough training. It took you a long time to get in. You were probably 6 months to a year when your application went in. And then by the time you went to training, which was in Regina at that time, and part of it used to be in Ottawa, but we were the first troop to go through training that trained all in Regina. So we were trained on horses, and you trained the subjects, and we had 10 months of training. And it was tough, really, really tough.
And when you got your first job, I think, or your first appointment, Prince George, was it?
Prince George was the first posting I had outside. I stayed as an instructor in Regina for a while, and what they call a troop leader. And then from there, I went to the RCMP band. I was the drum major in the band, didn't know any music. But my mother bought all the postcards at the local drugstore of all of us standing there together. And that was funny, but we came home, and then I got posted to BC, which is E Division, and Prince George was my first posting.
But I think it was the head officer or something, someone like that said to you, when you appeared first time all shiny, he said, well, look at the shine on that one.
Oh, yeah.
So wasn't
so easy. I walked
easy.
in the office, I'll never forget, it was like yesterday, and I walked in the office, it was downtown Prince George, right across from the Coliseum, and I had come out of the RCMP band, so we used to check with calipers to see if you had gained any weight. Worked out every day. I had training people, I was training people. Excuse me. And when I walked in there, my boots were shining like a silver dollar because we spit shone in those days. And he stood back and put his hands up like this. And he said, oh, what is that? Is that a mirage? What's going on here? Because they'd never seen that. You know, you worked in Prince George. You didn't have time to worry about where your boots were shining.
Sure, your first shot,
so
of course.
It
what
was
did
fun.
you learn in RCMP depot or in school about making decisions?
Well, depot was the place that you really made the decisions quickly. They learned how to make, the fortitude you had to make the training was unbelievable. There was lots of guys who were great people that came through at that time that didn't make it. And they tried to weed you out because if you couldn't take what they gave you, the street was going to be the next stop. So they had to make you strong. And I think the greatest thing was you never gave up at anything. You were going through, if you had to do it yourself, you'd have never made it. But you had 32 guys that started out. Now we graduated with 27, which was huge because we lost 5 or 6 guys. And it was tough training. And they did it because I think to this day that's what they should be doing. That's my opinion, only my opinion.
No, I understand. Well, they have to be doing something differently. We know that.
Yeah. And I think that was one of the biggest things. If you couldn't make the training, you were
okay.
But again, it gave you the fortitude that when you hit the street and for anything, after when I left, the fortitude was still there. And it was just the strength you had. You weren't scared of anything. There was nothing the street didn't scare you.
Well, you've always liked to be where the action is.
Absolutely.
I think, reading this. But when you're in a dangerous situation, obviously you have to make a fast decision.
Like now, it saves your life. That's basically what it is. And what you got to look at it when we first came into training, I was a kid that was off the prairie town where you didn't have to, you made a decision maybe to walk home or go somewhere for dinner, but that was about it. And when you got into this business, decision making was like that quick. You didn't think with your gut or anything. You had to make a decision to do something. And I think that's what the police force taught us, all of us at that time, was make your decision. It's not a question of not making a decision. You had to make a decision. Where a lot of people, they'll ponder a decision forever and never get it done.
Right. Fear of change, fear of making a decision, fear of being wrong.
Yeah. And they take the fear right out of that. So if you take the fear out of decision making, there is no fear. You can make the decision pretty quick.
Well, apparently you threw your hat I think it was in a room or something, got a hole in it, a bullet hole. So that was a good decision rather than wearing the hat into the room.
You got to be very careful with stuff like that because it was, you got to remember Prince George at that time. It still is it's a growing town, and those towns were all the lumber business, there was new pulp mills coming in. there's a lot of action. And for a young policeman, it was great because you learned really well and really quickly.
You bet, on the ground. When you decided to not be an RCMP officer anymore, and you told your father you were going to go into the pizza pie business with some Greeks in an Italian restaurant and actually cook and try to put it together, he said, you don't need a hand, son, you need a psychiatrist.
Yeah, he was not impressed.
I bet.
Yeah, he sat and listened to it. My dad was the type of guy that never raised his voice much. In fact, I can't remember ever raising. My mom was a disciplinarian really around the house, but his look was the one that scared the pants off you. And you'd be sitting there, and I can remember going in that day, and I'd come back from Edmonton, and I'd been stationed there, and as I came back, I got off, she came and picked me up at the service station where I got off with this truck that I drove back in. And I went home, and I said to him, I said, I want to do this business. I'm going into business. And he looked at me, and he thought, I knew what was going through his mind, but he never said anything. He just looked at me. And he said, tell me all about this. So I started to tell him, well, I'm going to sell pizza. And he said, pizza. And I said, no, pizza. We got into the argument 2 seconds into it. And then he said, well, tell me more. So I told him. I said, well, it's a bunch of Greeks that I'm good friends with, and we got Italian food, and we're in Edmonton. And that's when
and
I
they
said,
give me
all
a
I
free
need is
meal
a
on a
hand.
Friday night.
All I need is a hand. And he said, no, you need a psychiatrist. He said, what do you know? You don't know a damn thing about business. And of course, I've been around a long time as being a policeman, and that was not, he considered it. But the greatest thing he was losing was, here's his son, he raised to come through he came through the 30s, the dirty 30s that they call them. And what he felt, well, here's a guy, he's got a pension, he's got everything set. When I walked into Mount Police, he had a grin from ear to ear. When I left, he had a frown from ear to ear.
I'm sure.
And it was just, are you giving up a career here with all this pension? You got everything. You're not going to have to worry with me.
But the Greek boys, the Edmonton Greek boys who were making the pizza, they thought you'd be swell in the biz.
They did. In fact, Gus and I were talking about it, and Perry and George, all the brothers.
Gregarious Greeks.
Oh, we had a lot of fun together.
Apparently they weren't so good with the recipes. They just say a little bit of that, a little bit of
well,
this.
They didn't. They basically, Gus had came into Canada, jumped ship here in Vancouver, went over to Calgary, went up to Edmonton, got it. We helped him get his citizenship. He gets all settled in there. He is a sharp businessman, one of the sharpest men I ever met when we first started out. To take the business he did with nothing and build it into what he had when he sold it to Ron Coyle and his partners in Edmonton.
Right.
And then we bought it, George and I bought it in '83.
George Melville, your accountant partner, which your father also said to you, don't just hire an accountant, listen to him.
Exactly, Fanny. And these were all little lessons you got along the way. The biggest thing is making the decision to hire George, because I had other choices. He was my guy from day one. He and I got along so well. To this day we do. And there isn't many days that I can think of in a year that I'd go more than 2 to 3 days without talking to him. Whether I'm in Dallas and he's in Vancouver and I'm in Toronto or wherever, we talk every other day. We talk more in our wives.
That's interesting. But you're a big believer in partnerships, I know.
Absolutely.
And when a partnership doesn't work, your first one with Don Spence, he also a police officer. It wasn't that he was a bad guy. You just had to make that decision one day.
He was a great guy. We're both the same. We're both similar type people. You want to have an opposite. And to me, with George, it was... like I used to say, Jim, you're on the way to the moon. Let's just go halfway. We figure it out. So that was the sort of stability I had when he first came into business.
So
and he
balance.
was a great guy. And his family, imagine him. He's got a secure job with Pete Marwick, which became KPMG. He's got to go home and tell his dad, who had been with the Bank of Montreal for 50 years, I'm leaving that to go with a crazy ex-Mountie that's going into the pizza business in Penticton and leaving Pete Marwick. He had the same problem as I did.
But it wasn't, in retrospect, it wasn't a bad decision. You seem to have done quite well. We'll be back with Jim Treliving, one of the stars of CBC's Dragon's Den, and even if you're not in business, he has some savvy advice about making wiser decisions. He made one to go for red sauce rather than red surge, to leave a secure government job to make pizza pies.